Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Effective Resume Thursdays. We're very glad you're with us today. It's May 20th, 2021. Please note this event will be recorded. It's currently live on Facebook. The recording will be on the Career DFW Facebook page and the Career USA YouTube channel for others to view in the future. By participating in this event, and if you post a comment in the chat box or have your microphone or camera on, you give consent for your comment, name, and picture to appear. For those people on Zoom, we ask as soon as you think of a question, please just open up the chat box, put your question in the chat box. For those people watching on Facebook right now, please just enter your questions into the comment field. I am monitoring that feed, and I'll be sure to get those questions answered for you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Morse. Back in 2008, I started a website called careerdfw.org to help those people in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in their job search. In 2012, after a visit to the White House, being invited to go to the White House, I started a website called careerusa.org in 2012. I've written a book called What I've Learned About Your Job Search That You May Not Know. It is available on Amazon. Since 2007, I've been facilitating and leading the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group, and I'll tell you about our programming tomorrow at the end of this session. And since 2017, I've been a member of the practice interview team, the PIT Crew. If you want more information on the PIT Crew, please reach out to me and I'll send you some information on that. At the end of this session, we're going to give away a month of unlimited use of jobscan.co. We'll pick 2 winners at the very end of the session, so please hang with us to the very end. And our speaker today is Andi Cook. She's a life coach, career coach. I like the last thing on her. She's a crown straightener. I think that's a great description for people. And she's going to talk about selecting resume language. So Andi, thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. I am going to share my screen. Is that okay?
Yes.
Perfect. I believe that selecting resume language is one of the most important factors in a resume. So a little bit about my background. I combine just this unique combination of being a recruiter in multiple industries. So I started out in aviation and aerospace, did engineering, recruiting, and some technology. I have done independent staffing as well as worked at Matrix Resources in technical recruiting. So I have a broad understanding of what a lot of hiring managers are looking for. But before that, I worked in the behavioral programs within schools. And one of the things I studied most while going to A&M Commerce was literacy and how do we review and retain information. So the way we lay out information is important, but the language that we select is also very important to build a brand. So our goals for today will be to identify problems that you can solve for a company, establish your professional brand, craft a branding strategy, determine which words support your branding strategy, answer the question, how do I stand out among other applicants, and answer the question, how do I avoid being considered overqualified? Okay, so those are some things I want to make sure that we tackle in. Can you 100% avoid being considered overqualified? No. Can you select supportive language that would lessen maybe some of those objections when you may have more experience than the person reviewing the resume? And the way we word things is going to be important. Grant Baldwin says, if you try to be everything to everyone, you can really be nothing to anyone. I see this a lot on resumes where we want to list every single thing that we've done in the history of forever on our resume. And we don't stop and think, is this relevant to this company? So if you led a team of 240 people, but this is a team of 4, can't scare them off when you list this really large number that may not apply to what this company is doing. So when we look at tailoring, we're going to step back away from the need to be everything to everyone and then focus on, I can solve problems for your organization. Let's go back to the business basics. And I've been thinking about this a lot. Why do we throw away business best practices during our job search? In our business, would we go and consult with every single expert in our industry before making a decision? or go to 500 different conferences and change our entire business strategy every time we heard something new. We wouldn't do that in business, but we do it in job search because many of us are outside of our comfort zone. But I think if we go back to business basics, identify some strategies that you believe in that align well with your core values, with your integrity and your skill level. So the way we search for a job as a college grad is a little bit different than how we search for a job as an executive. So aligning your strategy with your skill set and then sticking with those best practices and not making these pendulum swings. So does that mean don't improve? No, I think we should always be improving. The reason I still take certifications and I'm working towards a whole new series of certifications because I always want to learn and improve, but don't completely change your resume every time you hear a new person talk. And so one reason I really love this is Carol Brick and I have spent some time together and we're on board on how to write resumes effectively. So I'm not going to teach you anything that's drastically different than her, but even if I did, if you're doing what you've learned from Carol, don't drastically change what you're doing just because I come in and say something new. Kind of evaluate it and decide, is this the best strategy for me? So back to the business basics. Don't forget the qualities that made you great in your last role. Business basics teach us to find something that works and stick with it. So we go back to kind of the lean startup book, and it talks about when to have these meetings of persevere or pivot. Sometimes we have to persevere and keep doing something before we see the effects of it. When you're customizing a resume, there comes a point that customization becomes I'll be whoever you want me to be. And so when I talk about tailoring your resume, it's not tailoring you, it's tailoring your message. Keep your message intact so that when you're customizing it, the qualities that are most relevant to a company are what we really are focused on, but we're not changing who you are. Don't change the message that you're sending, change the delivery. That's essentially what I want to talk to you about. I want you to change the way we deliver the message based on your audience, but we're not changing who you are. Sometimes I hear things like just put that you're a consultant, even if you haven't been, to fill that gap. That's not a strategy I teach. And I think if you can't in integrity talk about, I'm a consultant because I'm actually working with companies, even if it's pro bono work, that's still relevant, but I'm doing this, I'm building this with a specific company, but just to put it as a placeholder waters it down for people who are actually working hard out there as consultants. So it's not my favorite approach, but we're not changing the facts, but we're changing the wording that we use to deliver a new message. What we do customize is the technology. If they're saying that they want you to use Microsoft Planner and you've never used Microsoft Planner, but you've used Trello, right? You can use phrasing like Trello similar to Microsoft Planner, and you're not being outside of your integrity on this, but you're customizing for what they're requiring. If they're using a technology stack that includes a software that you've used, go back to your resume and make sure your resume indicates that you've used that. That's a great way to tailor your resume. Terminology is something that we're going to customize and tailor to the organization. We're matching their language. If they're saying customers, we're saying customers. If they're saying clients, we're saying clients, right? A lot of us draw the line as internal customers, external clients, but some companies call them internal customers. Let's match their language and speak in terms instead of trying to make them adapt to our history. If they're using acronyms and industry acronyms, we want to make sure we know what those are and use them as our relevant industry phrases or cultural clues. If they're talking about kind of this culture of learning or culture of accountability, then you can weave that in to your resume in a way that would align you and say, hey, this person could be a good fit. In your accomplishments, we're selecting accomplishments that are most relevant to the role that you're applying for and to the company that you're applying for. Kind of like the example I gave earlier. If you've worked in large organizations and you're applying for a startup, then sometimes we want to focus on how we helped grow the company, not how big the company was, or that if we're in a small startup that's internal only, they're just growing, they're not really looking at a global presence yet, then we may make a small reference to developing a global presence, but that won't be the focus of the resume. So when we're selecting accomplishments, we're going to make sure that we're listing relevant, applicable accomplishments. We're not reliving our glory days. And I always think, I was a football mom, so the amount of times I heard dads out there who had played football and were kind of reliving it through their kids or for their kids. It happens. Anybody else who's been out on a sporting event with their kids has seen this. And it can feel like that in the resume, where we're talking about something that's really important to us because we worked hard and it's a great accomplishment, but it may not be relevant to that company. So make sure you're not reliving the glory days, but really putting accomplishments that are relevant to the organization. It's not about everything you've ever done that's great and impressive. It's about what you've done that applies to the company. We're going to leverage technology to help with this. There's two strategies I have for you on that. One is building out a master resume that has the list of everything you've done in the history of forever. And that's going to have every single accomplishment, but it is not what you send out, but it's a great kind of just reference point where you can pull bullet points across and tailor or customize quickly. I'm a strong believer in you should not reinvent your resume every time. Once you get a bullet point, you want a way to save that. Out on my YouTube channel, I don't want to take the time to go through Microsoft Quick Parts and auto text today, but there are videos I have out there on using Microsoft and Quick Parts to tailor your resume. And it works similar to Text Blaze if you're using a Google-based application system, where you can save this text and you can save these snippets. So if I have a bullet point about program management and I want to save that because I want to reference it quickly, or accomplishments, so I definitely would recommend that as a resource out on my YouTube channel. It's under Maximize Your Job Search, and there's just ways that you can kind of streamline the customization process. Probably my favorite video on it, it says it's about me building a resume in 3 minutes, and it's all using Quick Parts and Text Blaze, because if you'll take the time to set that up on the front end, it will save you a ton of time in the long run. All right, and then what business problems do you solve? This is the very first thing I do with my coaching clients. We start by focusing on what business problems do you solve for a company. And we find 5 business problems, and then we give examples of each of those. So 2 to 3 examples of a business problem you solve. And I'm going to give you some suggestions here in a minute that would kind of help you build this brand. But you're going to pick 5. Do they have to be the same 5 every time? They don't. But it's going to craft your brand. Be solutions driven. There is a sales statistic that we teach a lot of times in sales training. 86% of the time, the first person to bring a solution to a problem will get the job or get the sale. So a lot of comparisons between interviewing and job applications and sales. We're selling that you have a solution to a problem, and then the monetization is the salary exchange for you coming in to solve those problems. So if you're solutions driven and you focus on 5 business problems that you solve, then we develop a message or a brand around that. So what do you really do? If somebody asks you, what do you do? And you go first to your job title, you want to then go into this message about how do I improve business? What problems do I solve? And so here's some ideas. I want to spend just a little bit of time so you can kind of say, hey, this applies to me, but you might streamline workflows, improve processes, increase sales. You might drive profitability for companies or enhance productivity. You might coach, mentor, develop and lead high-performing teams. You might build cross-functional collaboration for matrix or siloed organizations. You might engage employees or improve employee engagement. You might create a shared vision or increase client success. You might enhance customer experiences or user experiences, develop technology solutions to complex business problems, transform underperforming teams or accounts, align operations with regulatory compliance standards, manage projects and programs to deliver in scope, on time, and under budget results. You might deliver solutions with a focus on service excellence or ensure the integrity of company data. You might conduct and manage audits or drive efficiency and save money. So there's some ideas for picking 5 business problems that you solve. These, it doesn't mean a necessary monetary value. You can have an achievement even without a monetary value, the result being I enhanced efficiency. Bonus points if you can say I enhanced efficiency by a certain percentage, right? That would always be my first preference. But sometimes I encounter clients who are not privy to that information. And I want them to still be results focused and solutions focused, even if they may not have the numeric values for the overall achievement or result. But I do strongly believe that if you can get those, I recommend it. I think when we know our numbers, it sends a message that we're the expert in our business. But think in 5 business problems you solve. And now when we craft your bullet points on your resume and we're identifying what's most important, which of these problems do they need us to solve for them? And sometimes we can tell that in a job description, or if we know there was a merger and acquisition, then one thing that I can say, okay, I found this merger and acquisition in a news release. I know they may be experiencing a need for collaboration, or they may be experiencing a need for employee engagement, right? So I can kind of predict what problems that they might need me to solve. The other factor in selecting your resume language will be, what's your personality? What type of message are you sending? And I teach this a lot when I'm teaching interviews. Are you a driver, like a fact-based extrovert? You're decisive, goal-driven, and get it done, type A kind of person. You can be, they can be perceived as arrogant or bossy. So we want to be cautious on the wording, that we're not so driver that we alienate people, but we want to be very decisive and goal-driven. Analytical, those are our fact-based introverts. The pros and cons list kind of people. They ask a lot of questions, and we want to avoid a messaging that would say we get stuck in the paralysis of analysis or pick apart scenarios, but we want to send a message that we are detail driven and that we are analytical and we, kind of drive processes. Expressives of our storytellers, right? Those are our relationship driven extroverts. They have a tendency, like me, to overcommit themselves and can be yes people, but they're visionary leaders. They're passion driven. The downside is they can miss deadlines. So if I were going to send a message that I was expressive, one thing I would do is also focus on my ability to deliver on-time results, right? So kind of to negate that stereotype. And then our amiable people are relationship-driven introverts. They are calm. They can be perceived as flat or just really low energy, but a lot of times they're just very laid back and hard to excite. They have deep feelings. They want harmony and avoid conflict. So we use supportive language to send an amiable message. Some examples of that include wording for your brand. So if a common phrase that I see on resumes a lot is led and managed. But we really want to get creative with the verbs here and sending a message that it tells a little bit more. Led and manage doesn't tell me a lot about you, but if you can get a little more creative, if I'm a driver, I might say controlled or executed, oversaw or spearheaded, right? And so there's a list there. But if I'm amiable, I want people to get along. I'm not that change agent. I'm coordinating and organizing and planning. It's kind of supportive, helpful language. This is also where it comes in, where I mentioned about sending a message that you may be overqualified. You might want to use more amiable language that says, I supported, I coordinated, instead of always using driver type of language. Again, that applies most when you're applying for a job that may be a pay grade less than what you've done in the past. I see this a lot with our mature job seekers who want to take a step back. They may have been a director or above, and as they're moving into the last 5 or 10 years of their career, they want to take a step back and not necessarily have the same level of responsibility and 60, 80-hour work weeks that they had previously. And so we want to use more supportive language when we're doing that. If you're expressive, pick verbs that kind of tell a story. I orchestrated this, I championed or implemented, I transformed, that kind of have a word picture associated with them. And then if we're analytical, we're going to use more strategic language like chaired or operated or programmed. Okay, does that make sense to everyone so far? I see a couple of chats. Oh, y'all are I love it. I love it. Connect. That's one of my favorite parts about these groups. All right. And then here's wording for your brand. Another common verb that I see or two would be developed and coordinated. So I might use built, initiated, launched, pioneered, or steered. Pioneered is not always the best choice for people who are more mature job seekers and may not want to be seen as kind of a pioneer. But then there are times I've used that, especially with people who were transformational in the beginning of an industry or a beginning of a process. But established, founded, incorporated, or facilitated would be our more amiable approach to this. And then expressive is designed, envisioned, chartered, and introduced. Analytical would be devised, engineered, formalized, and formulated. And Jeff, I will send you actually a handout on this, and you're welcome to distribute that if you want. It's a chart of all the different verb choices and ways that you can, so you can get a little creative on your resume. But just wanted to give you guys some examples of that and how I would word it to send a powerful message regarding your personal career story. If we're, instead of changed, we can pull centralized, merged, overhauled, replaced, restructured, revamped, or strengthened. And this is one that I see a lot. I want to see those really powerful, really creative words that tell me about you. And again, it goes to sending this overall message that beyond just seeing what you do, I want to see who you are. And as I'm analyzing this, I'm getting a feel for your brand and your messaging. And once you pick these verbs and select this brand, we're going to carry it forward into your other platforms. But again, it's about creating a message. And before we meet somebody, our best way, we have written communication to tell our story. And so getting creative instead of using the same verbs over and over. Remember that recruiters search by nouns, not by verbs. So this is where you get to get creative. So clarified, integrated, refined, and refocused for amiable here. And then expressive would be more like influenced or redesigned, rehabilitated, transformed. I like the expressive because I feel like they're a little bit more fun, but at the same time, that's not for everybody. I have a lot of people who are more analytical who do not feel comfortable using words like rehabilitated on their resume. So it has to feel true and authentic for you. Analytical might say something like converted or modified or reorganized or standardized, right? Updated or upgraded. It's going to be a factual driven statement, not a feelings based statement. One thing I call brand symmetry is what I mentioned just a few minutes ago about creating one brand across all platforms. So your resume, your LinkedIn, and then the way you interview, all of that should be a cohesive message. If I see this a lot with resume writers where the words in the resume do not match the person in front of me, and it can create almost a distrust or just some questions about something doesn't align here. This feels very different than what I looked at on a piece of paper. Now we're talking and it doesn't sound the same. So I think sometimes we do ourselves a disservice if we're working with resume writers who don't work with you and really get to know your voice. Great resume writing should be ghost writing. It should be somebody who collaborates with you, not just writes it for you, because you do want that branding message and you do want the symmetry that creates trust across all platforms, that you are the same person on paper as you are in person. And then there's some words I would like you to avoid, right? I see these a lot, and it's words like numerous, multiple, and several. Those are not measurable numbers. So I see this where led multiple simultaneous projects, or I think we have to be very cautious on this wording, or led several engagements. That actually doesn't tell me anything about what you did here. So that's not a measurable number. Responsible for. You will never see me use the words responsible for on a resume, because it tells me what you were tasked with, but it doesn't really tell me what you did. I also don't use accountable for. I want you to get back to those verbs to really say, what did you do and accomplish? So not just what were you accountable for, but what did you accomplish? And it's just a slight shift in mindset, a little bit different connotation there. And then the other thing I see a lot is people just copy and pasting their job description in their resume. I don't know where this started, but job descriptions are not accomplishments, they're tasks. So if we write accomplishment-driven resumes, which we should do, then it says what we did, but we also say what was the impact of it. And that's not included in a job description. So I might say, increased employee engagement by implementing, monthly team meetings, or however that may be phrased. But notice I'm going to start with what I accomplished, and then I'm going to tack on what I did that accomplished that. Even if somebody only read the first part of that sentence where increased employee engagement, even if they didn't move on to that right side, they still know what I accomplished, right? So think accomplishments first. And then I don't know why we use etc. on a language. Again, it doesn't tell me anything. It could mean literally anything. So etc., other, or similar. So I see these. Now, I use similar only in the context of trying to draw a parallel between what they're asking for. Like in the technology example I gave earlier, Microsoft Planner and Trello, or something where you're trying to draw a parallel that I could transition here, that's when I would use similar. But where I see or and similar task, or and other duties as assigned, which I also don't think belongs on a resume. But etc. is probably the biggest offender there. And again, it just doesn't tell me anything. And then at the bottom, we often see this references available upon request. Take it off, guys. Again, this is implied. As a hiring manager, I'm probably the only one here. I very rarely do reference checks. The reason is I do employment verification, and that's different. But on a reference check, you're never going to give me the name and number of somebody who's going to tell me anything bad about you. So that's not an important factor for me. I want to see some demonstrated expertise, and I want to look at your LinkedIn. I can tell a lot on your LinkedIn profile by how do you talk to and about other people? What kind of conversations are you engaging in? What recommendations have you received, and what recommendations have you given? I look at the overall theme of your profile. I can tell more on that than picking up the phone and calling somebody who may or may not be your best friend. So I would say take that references available upon request. Also, it's kind of implied. If somebody asks for references, obviously you're going to give those. So take it off. It's taking up real estate that you don't need. And I do not recommend listing your references on your resume as well. I don't think that's best practice. most importantly, and then I'm going to turn it over for questions. See, Jeff, I learned last time where I didn't take us down to the wire. But I want you to be honest. I want you to be authentic. I want you to be relevant. And I want you to be yourself. So I'm not sending you in there as Andy's version of you. I want you to go in there and remember everything that makes you great and what problems you solve. All right. So I want to open it up for questions because I know this is something that we really kind of focus on and talk about a lot. I see some familiar faces here. So Michelle says she puts her bosses down for reference. I get it. I probably would just do that upon request and not list it on the resume.
But I think it's real important that you need to have a conversation with your references to let them know, number one, that are they willing to be a reference?
Right.
Number two, if you are going to submit your references to a certain company, let those references know they may be contacted by one of those companies, by that company, who may be calling them, what you talked about, what the role is, because they can help sell you into the job, if that person happens to reach out. So don't just send names off and don't tell the references they may be contacted, because personally, I don't answer my phone if I don't have them in my contact list. But if I know that I'm expecting a call from, XYZ Corporation, I may pick it up.
Absolutely. And like iPhones where you can just auto reject any calls that are not already in your contact list. So I don't see that. The other thing is just making sure they know, like Jeff said, what did you talk about? So I might pick up the phone and say, hey, Jeff, I applied for this job. I'm excited about it because it's going to utilize my abilities to build relationships. And you might remember when we worked together, that was one thing that I was really passionate about. Would you mind speaking to that? And now I'm not writing it for him. I have people that do this for me. They're like, hey, I wrote this recommendation for you to put on my profile. I'm like, no, that's not how I do that. So I think don't go overkill with it, but I do think that great conversations should happen around that.
That's
Questions?
That's something. Oh,
go ahead, Steve.
That's something too that is really good. I have a few people in my network that basically they leave the blanket statement of anytime you need a reference, just put me down. But exactly what you're talking about there is extremely critical, because then they have the context of what's going on and they know that they might receive it as well. Just because I've got people from years ago that every time I talk to them, hey, anytime you need a reference, just put me down. And that's spooky.
I agree. The other thing we've started doing on resumes, and this is really kind of a 2021 trend, and not that it was just invented, but just we're seeing it more, is adding a reference to your resume. So maybe just a quote like what's on your LinkedIn profile at the top. And making it, I do it in smaller font, but I use this a lot as kind of just an available reference. Make sure that the person knows that you're sending that out with that information on that. And then especially if that person's a reference, then they've already kind of been familiar with how that person feels about you. I really, really like those up there as long as it makes sense from a structure. And resumes it's not a one size fits all. I saw a good question from Kathy Steele that said, what if you are a combination of two? I think everybody's a combination of one or more. I am that weird person who scores almost evenly across the board. And so sometimes having a cohesive brand can be a little bit of a challenge for me. And so I have to look at this, but amiable and analytical are not, those are not in contrast with each other. So I think you can weave the language that says, I'm data driven. I also want people to get along with each other. So I support you. I just do it with data. And I think that for me, I'm very analytical, anyone who knows me, but I also am very expressive. And I really want people to connect with the story. Leadership is not my preference. It's just kind of what has always happened in my life, where I just got promoted into leadership. And I make that work. But when you go back to my core basics, that is not what in my heart is most important to me. I've always told my managers, if you want me to lead, I'll lead. If you want me to follow, I'll follow. But if I'm not careful when I'm applying for an individual contributor role, and I have all this information about how I've led teams, they're like, well, why would you want to do that? You've been a leader. Then I'm sending the wrong message across. So sometimes I'm showing a piece of me, not putting all of my cards on the table. And I think that's our tendency, is we want to reveal every ounce of ourselves and tell our entire history. And really it's just, hey, here's my resume. Here's why I'm a good fit for this role in your company. Other things I see done, changing titles. I think you have to be very, very, very cautious with this. Stay within your integrity. I see this a lot where somebody held a manager title in a director level role. I've been there. So what I will do on that is list like recruiting manager and in parentheses put director level role. And then I can speak to that. I have it on my resume, but I think it's really important to know how, like what made it a director level role. I managed 2 other managers and I had budgetary oversight. I think you have to be able to speak to that, not just, well, I was responsible for a lot, right? Okay.
Questions anybody has? Questions? We have plenty of time. Nothing. We have a quiet crowd today.
Do have a quiet crowd. Lori, I know you have questions.
This is Ann. I have a question. It's not exactly related to this, but kudos, Andy. This was some great fresh material. So thank you very much for that. But I am in the middle of a major career pivot. I have 23 years behind me in one job, but I'm now a student. I'm officially a student at UT doing online work. Is that something I might want to consider putting on my LinkedIn resume type thing, that I am now officially a student?
I think absolutely. And the other thing, I'm glad you mentioned this, Ann. When you're pivoting careers and you're doing an entire industry shift or a role shift, make sure that your language in your resume is not industry specific. And I see this a lot. We'll use travel, for example. A lot of people just came out of travel. And when I look at their resume, everything in there is related to travel systems. And we don't do a good job of broadening it out. So when you're talking about, instead of I delivered XYZ products, broaden it out of I delivered consumer-based products or business B2B solutions. Go a little bit broader so that you're connecting the dots for people.
Yeah.
And that way it doesn't paint you or pigeonhole you back into what you've been doing for a long time and you achieve success. But it's what I call crossing industry verticals. And in your summary, I would probably put something like that. Combines 20 years of proven success in this vertical, now enrolled or currently enrolled in this program. I would kind of marry those two together to create a brand that says I can take what I learned and apply it to something new. And there's one of the stages of learning is connecting knowledge with prior knowledge. And in that, we want to make sure that we're tying or we're connecting the dots for people, because if we don't connect it, they can't see how it relates. So it may be a great accomplishment. They just can't relate to it.
Yeah, I'm going to need some help with that when the time comes. I'm not quite there yet. I just started the program, but yeah, I'm definitely going to have to start thinking on those lines. Great tips. Thanks.
So Andy, you're saying it's okay on your resume to list your current job, your most recent thing as student, UT student, or
I think that you absolutely can on your resume. Or currently enrolled. I also use this strategy when covering, if you took 3 or 4 years off to go to school, list in there that you were a full-time student. But I think you absolutely can put that as either your most relevant job, especially if you're not currently working.
Right.
Or again, and on the structure of your resume, now your education becomes the most relevant thing, the qualifying factor for your application. So your education now goes to the top. And after education, then we're going to list academic experience. And that's going to be projects that you've worked on in school, volunteerism that you've done that's related to your work. And does that make sense?
Yes,
So
it
now
does. It does.
it's flip-flopping it instead of the professional experience coming first. Now we're really tying it together that, hey, this is the most relevant. Yes, I have this great career, but I have this new skill and I am ready to apply it. I encountered this when switching from education into technology. And so when I'm interviewing and they're going, okay, how are you going to troubleshoot computers? And I was just able to look at them and say, hey, troubleshooting is troubleshooting, whether it's why a child is throwing themselves on the floor in the cafeteria or why this computer won't work. It's about identifying a logical sequence and following the steps to get to the root cause. And the manager's like, oh, okay, got it. Yeah, you're actually right on that. And so I was able to draw the parallel for them. But had I not, and had he not been bold enough to ask that question, I probably wouldn't have gotten that job.
Yeah, okay, good advice. Thank you.
And what are you pivoting to?
Paralegal. I was a corporate research analyst for 23 years at EDS. I have a master's in library science. My job was offshored, and so I had a chance to go back to school, and I felt that if I can put some legal knowledge on top of my research skills, that I can work and do legal research for an attorney's firm.
This is so smart. And as soon as you said paralegal and library science, to me, it clicked because when we talk about a pivot, and we see this a lot, and I always use a clock. So if where you are is 12 o'clock, a lot of people want to go to 6 o'clock immediately when we're looking for what's closest to the money, closest to 12 o'clock. So 1 o'clock or 11 o'clock pivot would be a lot easier to make than a 12 to 6 o'clock pivot. So instead of just going the opposite direction, try to find what's closest to the money, and you have done that.
I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah, I think you'll do well.
Thanks.
Anybody else?
Well,
Any-
since Andy called me out,
I know, right?
I will piggyback on Ann because I'm in not the exact situation as Ann. However, I have been looking for a long time for this new career, and I was in a company, one job for over 20 years. I loved it. I was in the nonprofit sector, didn't know my dreamy world would come to a crash, and I've had to learn, from scratch, and everybody's been helpful, but I feel like, I'm going down one mountain, then going up another, down, up, down, up. So I started to try to, I love this real estate sector. So I've been applying to different jobs besides nonprofit, but in my real estate sector. And, they look at my resume and my LinkedIn, and it doesn't have enough. It has nonprofit and program management, and I'm a trainer and I'm really good at all this program management, but it doesn't have enough real estate in it. So Andy, this has been very, very helpful. However, how do I had some interviews, and I did talk exactly how I could transition. My skills were transferable to this particular job. However, I can't just put two different resumes and two different LinkedIn's up there. So how do you split yourself in two if you're trying to pivot to a different type of job when you have the skill set? However, they're going to be lower end jobs, like maybe a coordinator position, but you're not going to have the exact experience.
Sure. I think it's important there to go broad, kind of like what I was saying before about broadening out instead of being specific to nonprofit, and maybe broaden it out a little bit and avoid some of the absolute specifics that you could include on a tailored resume. But because you cannot, it's impossible to tailor your LinkedIn every time because you have no idea who's going to look at it when. So you can't keep changing that. Then I would go to a broader language on it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Keep it, you incorporate both. What did Bonnie say?
Lori, what part of real estate are you looking at?
Well, most recently, I had some informational interviews with commercial real estate, and I could definitely do program management, work under commercial coordinator, and also property management. I applied for assistant property management positions, well, one position, and I've got all the skill sets, the budgeting, the accounting, the community, working with volunteers, boards of directors. So I have all the skill sets. I don't have all the licenses, but that's not an issue for me because I'm always, learning and taking new courses, and like I got my master's later in life, et cetera. So like Ann, I'm not afraid of learning a new trick or two.
Okay, so we have a group that meets every Friday morning called the Ring or Real Estate Networking Group. And everybody in that group is affiliated with real estate in some way, shape, or form. So if nothing else, you can get connections, referrals, that kind of stuff. So send me a LinkedIn invite and let's connect and I can help you out.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ring Group is a really good group. They've been around for a long time.
Love it, love it. I saw Bonnie. Bonnie, you said that you've been hired into newly created positions 3 times with great success. Can that be positively positioned? I think it can, especially if the role is newly created. Sometimes you don't know that yet. But I think you can, in your first bullet point, served in a newly created role. I think you could weave that story in and leverage that, particularly if it's a newly created position. I would make sure that they know that you've done that you kind of navigate change and that you can define success when it has not been predefined for you, and sending that message.
Andy has posted in the chat box the selecting resume wording. So that's that document with all those key verbs in there. So that's there for you to please download.
Are companies really using LinkedIn to check out profiles on us? Do they use it a lot?
Some do.
Okay.
I mean, I would think that if I was going to interview you before you came in the door, I Googled your name, I looked you up on Facebook, I looked you up on LinkedIn. I mean,
That's what I do to people interviewing me. Yes.
Should I have? Probably not. But, I want to know what's out there about you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, hopefully you're doing the same thing to the person you're going to interview with. You're going to look them up on Google and Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram because you want to see what kind of stuff they post about.
Yeah. Well, the worst thing I found so far is I have a recruiter that's been there 3 months, and then I'm thinking, oh, this interview is not going to go well.
I have seen offers pulled over LinkedIn. And I'll give a specific example. When I was working at Matrix and we had somebody get an offer and they went out and saw one of her recent LinkedIn posts and did not appreciate the tone of it and pulled it. And so it had to do with her being angry at her last employer, and they didn't want that kind of toxicity on their team, and they pulled the offer.
And that was off of Facebook?
It was off of LinkedIn.
Really?
Yeah.
That's why I don't touch Facebook.
So I reckon, here's the deal. When you tie yourself to an organization, now what you post is a representation of them. So on LinkedIn, it says where you work. So when she's posting how she feels about her past employer, and that's public information, that's now their information and a representation of her career brand. So yeah. And if your Facebook is not business appropriate, then I would definitely recommend making sure that is very, very, very locked down or deleted. But screenshots are forever.
Right. Well, Andy, thank you very much. Great information today. Let's see if I can get my act going on here again. Wonderful. Thank you very much for joining us today. You didn't really define what a crown straightener is, but that's okay. We'll all just have to imagine what that is.
Imagine.
It's a great picture on your, it very stands out on your LinkedIn profile. So if you want to connect with Andy, please do so. Please send her a message. Please send her a personal note and let her know that you saw her today on Effective Resume Thursdays. It really is a real benefit. And also just a little reminder on LinkedIn, when you see that blue, either blue message button or blue connect button, that means you can send a personal note. If you see a white connect button, that means that you cannot. So you need to go find that person's profile to get to that blue connect button. All right, Career Dfw Crew USA, we're putting on training 5 days of the week. We're staying busy every day of the week. Tomorrow morning at 9:30, our speaker, Rick Gillis, is going to be talking about job search optimize in the QTNT personal value calculation process. Rick has a new book coming out in September. So we will be recording the workshop, but I cannot put it up on, I can't put it on Facebook or on YouTube until September 28th. So I'll be deleting it right off of Facebook after the session's over tomorrow. But I'll be posting the video up in September when his book does come out. So you'll be hearing things from his new book. You'll be getting a preview of his new book that's coming out. Also tomorrow at 1 o'clock, Women of Wisdom, as long as you're a woman and as long as you either have wisdom, need wisdom, or are looking for wisdom, they meet the first and third Friday of each month. You're welcome to join them. You do need to send an email. It's by invitation only. Send an email to WOW, @careerdfw.org, and they will send you an invitation for that. The reason being, they're trying to keep the group down to 20 or 25 people because it's a very interactive discussion in a lot of cases. And if there's too many people on the line, it tends to be a little bit complicated. Next Monday, Rehumanize Your Job Search. Our guest speaker will be Trevor Houston. You know Trevor from the Who You Know workshop. On Tuesday, our LinkedIn presentation on Tuesday will be LinkedIn Search Engine Optimization, getting your LinkedIn profile up to snuff. And then next Wednesday, for Interviewing Wednesdays, we'll be on session number 4. They're going to talk all about video interviewing. I'm sure a lot of you have already done that, but it's just some tips and tricks and everything about video interviewing. This session will be recorded. It will be on the Career Dfw Facebook page, and later this afternoon, it'll be up on the Career USA YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'd really, really appreciate it. On the YouTube channel, it looks something like this, the Career USA YouTube channel. Be sure to click on playlist, and then down at the very bottom, don't click on the video, but pick whatever subject you want, and then click where it says view full playlist, where that red arrow is. And then will up come a list of all the different topics and dates. Should be from the most recent down to the oldest, and you can go back and watch any of the videos that you're interested in watching again. If you're not receiving emails about our workshops, please join the Career USA mailing list. You can send an email to Career USA, the +sign subscribe @groups.io. I'll put that email address up here at the very end. All right, so it's time to pick a couple winners. We're going to give away 2 winners for an unlimited use of jobscan.co. We need you to put in the chat box or in the comment field on Facebook. Please put a number between 1 and 100. Don't select 100. I'll tell you that. Between 1 and 100, and the 2 closest winners, without going over, we're playing the Price is Right rules. So the 2 closest without going over. We'll give everybody a few seconds to get your numbers in there. Anybody else want to play? Okay, let's see here. Our winning number is 80. 80 is our winning number. So let's see the 2 closest.
Well, she went over.
50, I guess 55 and 59 look like our 2 closest numbers. So Marissa and Kathy, if you will please put in your email address in the chat box so I can copy that over and I'll get you on the list. This will be for the month of June. So the beginning June 1st, you'll probably get an email from with all the login instructions on how to do that. So Marissa and Kathy, please put in your email address into the chat box, and that will get your name up on the list.
What
All
does
right.
the JobScan do?
JobScan is a way for you to combine, you load a job description, you load your resume, and then hit the button, and it will tell you what percentage of a match you are.
Gotcha.
So it may say you're a 50% match, a 60% match, a 70% match, what you may want to change. But you do have to remember when you load a job description, and let's say talk about, and here's the example that I'm really familiar with. They talk about a 401k, and they have vacation and 401k, whatever. Well, you're not going to have those kinds of things on your resume, so you're not going to ever have a 100% match. So don't worry about the fact that whatever that number is, but just look and see, well, what keywords are they talking about in JobScan, and what keywords on your resume don't match up, because that's, you know, what's going to get you higher and higher. So that's what JobScan does. So Michelle, one of these months you will win, and you'll have a chance to go use it. All right, please remember, Crew Dfw, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We have no full or part-time employees. Andy's a volunteer. I'm a volunteer. Everything I've done over since 2008 has been as a volunteer. Crew Dfw, we survive on donations. It helps pay for Zoom, web names, web hostings, anything that I can't get donated. So please consider making a donation when you land your next job. That way we can continue to provide the services that we provide. We are looking for a couple volunteers. If you know of anybody who has Joomla experience, we could use some help with that. If you know anybody who knows anything about MySQL, that would be beneficial. And if you know an attorney who has trademark experience, I'm looking for those three people who can help out in those three areas. So thank you very much for joining us today. There's that email address if you'd like to join our mailing list. Andy, once again, thank you for filling in today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me.